This is just an overview of what you will need if you want to start reloading your own ammunition. I'm into Western action shooting, and I shoot about 100 rounds of 45 caliber ammunition a month. So it definitely pays me to reload my own ammunition. Here I'm removing the spent primers just to prepare the brass for cleaning. I like to have that primer pocket exposed so it gets cleaned also. I'm using an old Lee single stage press. You could actually use this press for all of your reloading, just changing the die for whatever process you're doing, seating the bullet or crimping the bullet. Here I'm using a die that removes the primer and resizes the case, straightens out the case to get it ready to clean. Here I'm using a vibrating tumbler with the media I'm using is actually crushed walnut hulls. It's fairly coarse, does a pretty good job of cleaning. If your brass isn't real dirty, you can use other media such as corncob media. Does a pretty good job. These tumblers, you can buy them for between $50 and $100 depending on whose it is, how fancy it is. I'm adding a little brass polish into the mix here. The media typically costs you about $20. And these do a pretty good job. Certainly good enough. And you just turn them on and let them run for 3 to 4 hours. Another way to clean your brass, and in my opinion a better way to clean your brass, is with a rotary tumbler. These are a little more expensive. They'll typically run you $150 to $200, but in my opinion they do a better job. You can see here, this is actually filled with stainless steel media, little stainless steel pins. And again, the media will cost you about $20 if it doesn't come with the tumbler. And they're pretty simple. I just add a gallon of cold water. I put in a couple of teaspoons of Dawn dishwashing soap. And I add about a quarter teaspoon of lemon shine, which is a powder that you use in the dishwasher. And then throw in the dirty brass. And much like the vibrating tumbler, I'll just turn this on and let it run for 3 to 4 hours. Okay, it's been 3 hours, so let's take a look at our brass from the vibrating tumbler with the corncob media. Not bad. And now let's take a look at our brass from the rotary tumbler. Here's a neat little gadget. It's called a separator, and it really makes it easier to get all of those little steel pins out of your cases. It's not necessary, but it just makes things a little quicker and easier. You can see these pins are pretty small, so they get inside your cases and can be, a little difficult to get them out sometimes. You can buy these separators for about $40. After cleaning my brass with the rotary tumbler, I like to stand the cases on end just to let the water drain out of them better. I use these little reloading trays that you can get for about $8 a piece, or you can just stand them on the table. Okay, here you can see this was done in the tumbler with walnut media, and you can see it left a little stain on the brass. I mean, it's pretty good. The primer pockets are not as clean. Inside, not as clean. They're clean enough to use, but you can see tumbling them with the steel media just cleans them up a whole lot better. Primer pockets are really clean. Inside the brass is really clean. Just does a lot better job. Okay, this is a Lee turret press. It's 4 stages. So I'll put an empty brass case in here. First stage, we pop out the old primer, resize the case. I'll set a new primer in the primer setter here. That seats the primer into the cartridge. Next stage, dumps the powder and bells the mouth a little bit so it'll accept a bullet. And I always check to make sure it did throw the right amount of powder. Then I set a bullet on here. Next stage, seats the bullet to the right depth. And then I have, some people use this, some people don't. I have a factory crimp die, which puts a nice little roll crimp on it. And I have a finished round. Now I want to be perfectly clear here. This is not an in-depth reloading tutorial. This is just an overview of the process and the equipment that you need. It's really critical that you understand reloading, and particularly with the powders that you're using, and make sure you follow proper procedures. There's lots of information available, so if you get into reloading, be sure to read up, study how to do it with the ammunition and the materials that you're using. You know, particularly with smokeless powder, it typically does not fill the case, so if you're not careful, you could double charge the case, put in twice as much powder as you need, and you would have a serious overcharge that may blow up your gun. So it's really critical that you follow the instructions for whatever powder you're using, and be sure you use the proper procedure for reloading. What I'm using here is a Lee turret press, and it does have a feeder for the primers, and it also has a powder measure on it that automatically drops the right amount of powder, but I always check and make sure that it did drop the powder. And you can buy these turret presses. You can buy the turret kit with the powder measure and the primer feeder and some accessories. You can buy the whole thing for about $225. Now, sometimes, depending on the powder I'm using, and particularly with black powder, I will manually load the powder into the case. So here you see I've already got the powder in the cases. I'm not using the powder feeder on the reloading press. So I'm just using 2 stages of the press to seat the bullet and crimp the bullet. So here are your four components for any cartridge, which is the powder, the case, the bullet, and the primer. This is a smokeless round. This is a Trail Boss smokeless powder, and you can see it's almost like little Cheerios, very light, fluffy powder. And then here is the black powder. And you can see it's just fine granules. This is a 3F black powder, so it's pretty fine granules. Now, I did do one comparison that was a little different. This is a 200 grain bullet in the smokeless cartridge, and I was showing this, I was loading this for my rifle. This is a 250 grain bullet for the black powder. When I'm shooting black powder in my rifle, I tend to put a little heavier bullet in it, and it seems like it decreases the blowback I get of powder getting back into the action of the rifle. I'll show you a comparison of black powder and smokeless powder. These are the same size 45 caliber cartridges, and they'll both be loaded for cowboy action shooting to shoot around 800 feet per second, as they did back in the day. 800 to 1,000 feet per second. Of course, back in the Old West period, everything was black powder. This one is filled with black powder, and you can see the case is nearly full. It's that full of black powder. This one is smokeless powder. And you can see that case is about half full of smokeless powder. And also, you see a difference in the bullet. This is the smokeless bullet. It's a 200 grain bullet, and right there is the crimp line. So that cartridge or that bullet will sit that deep in the cartridge, in the case. So you've still got powdered about here. So you've got this much open space. With black powder, you want no airspace. You want that bullet to sit right down on the powder, or maybe even compress it just a little bit. And here is the crimp groove on this bullet. So you can see that powder was up to right there, and how deep that bullet will sit. It's actually going to compress that powder just a little bit. Another difference you'll see, this red ring here is the lubricant for the smokeless powder, a little thin band. For black powder, look how much bigger the lubricant groove is, how much more lubricant that carries, and it's a different type of lubricant. Most of them are actually beeswax.
So if you want to get into reloading, here's an idea of what you would need. And there's different levels
that you can get into it. You can use a single stage press, and you'll need to buy a set of dies for whatever caliber you're loading. And that would be you put in one die, do all the processes. Say you're loading 50 rounds, you put in your decapping die and resizing die, and you do all 50 rounds. Then you would change to your powder die and do all 50 rounds. Then you change to your bullet seating die and do all 50 rounds. The turret press just has all your dies already installed and adjusted, and you just do one stage after the other. So here's, roughly, you can, for as little as $250, you can get into a single stage setup. For $443, you could buy a nice turret kit. And there's more expensive, fancier outfits. There's reloading setups made by a company called Dillon, which are, I think, better quality equipment, but it is more expensive. Dillon press will run you at least $500. And there's other little accessories that you may need to buy. Lee makes a nice set of little scoops for measuring out black powder, maybe a funnel, and other minor accessories that you may need to buy. And here we'll look at the cost for reloads. Now, the first time you reload, assuming you're starting from scratch, you're going to have to buy the brass cases, and they'll run you about 30 cents each. And you can see that's more than half the cost of your round of ammunition. The bullet's about 27% of your total cost. However, after that first load, then you're reloading, and you don't have to buy that case again. You can reuse it. You can see your cost drops down to about 26 cents per round. So how much does reloading actually save you? Well, let's assume you're shooting 8 matches of Western action shooting per season. And you're shooting about 100 rounds per match, or 100 rounds per month. You can buy Cowboy Loads off the shelf for about $31 for a box of 50, or 62 cents per round. So if you're shooting 100 rounds a month, you're spending $62 per month for ammunition, or just a little under $500 for a whole season of 8 matches. If you're using reloads, assuming you're buying new brass for your first load, that first load would cost you about $55. But then your later loads, where you're reloading and don't have to buy the brass again, your cost goes down to about $26 for 100 rounds. So for an 8-month season, you'd have a total cost of about $238, or just a little less than half of what the off-the-shelf ammunition would cost you. So you got a saving of $258. But you have to buy your reloading equipment. So you're going to spend that $258 at least on your reloading equipment. So it actually comes out kind of even, about the same either way, whether you buy off-the-shelf ammunition or reload your own if you have to buy the reloading equipment. However, the next season, you've already got that reloading equipment, so then you really start to realize the savings of getting your ammunition at half the cost of off-the-shelf ammunition. Now, the brass cases don't last forever. With these 45 caliber cartridges, they do have pretty thick brass, and I can typically get 8 or 10, sometimes even 12 reloads, but then you might see your case starting to split, as this one is here. Because you're constantly crimping and straightening out that brass, it's eventually going to wear out. And you can see this one's starting to show a crack here, so this one's ready to be thrown away, and I'll have to buy new brass.
it figured out.